Chapter 21. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Acting is the real strength. 3. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Zhang Yuan's father might not have even cared that he had lost the saber-shaped stone. When his son had found it from some corner in the house, he had only taken it as an opportunity to beat the child up. Otherwise, Zhang Yuan's father wasn't someone who would take ancestral heirlooms seriously. It was just a piece of broken stone, for heaven's sake. Even if it was an ancestral inheritance, it wasn't worth much. If Zhang Yuan hadn't found it, his father probably would not have known that it existed. Trying to remember that specific incident, Li Hao walked to the corner of the courtyard. There were small stones piled up on one side. They were used to repair walls. Li Hao looked at the stones, but there was none that matched the one in his memory. He recalled that that particular stone had been similar to a knife. There is someone watching me, it might not be a good idea to rummage through things openly, thought Li Hao. Black Panther had been silent all this while. Now it whined in a low voice. It was the sound of fear. Black Panther whimpered again. Li Hao's body turned numb. He followed Black Panther's gaze. His heart pounded in fear. The door of the house had been closed. He remembered closing it when he entered. But now, it was open slightly. A red tint appeared at the crack. The red shadow, thought Li Hao anxiously. His heart beat violently. The red shadow was here. He had only vaguely seen it on Zhang Yuan when he died. But how was it here? According to his knowledge, the red shadow should appear only on rainy days or other such bad weather. Why was it here at the Zhang family residence? Was it here at Zhang Yuan's house all this time searching for the saber? Cold sweat beaded Li Hao's forehead. He wasn't prepared to face the red shadow. It was too early. If it attacked and burned him, he could do nothing. Damn it. I didn't even contact the night patrollers, thought Li Hao. He was frozen on the spot. He was trembling. He wanted to run. But if he did, then whoever was watching him would know he could see the red shadow. That would create its own set of problems. If they thought he couldn't see it like most ordinary people, he shouldn't have a reason to be afraid. Thoughts flashed into his mind in a jumble. Black Panther was barking now. Be quiet, he berated the dog. Who is it? I am the chief patrol officer from the inspection office. Who's inside? Said Li Hao. He raised his Vortex Mk3 and aimed. Is someone there? Come out. He had seen a part of the red shadow, he was sure of it. He resisted the urge to go find it. He stared at the main door with his pistol ready. Li Hao slowly approached the main door. He strode forward in the last few steps and kicked open the door. The loud bang was enough to attract the attention of whoever was nearby, but he didn't care. There was a rustling sound outside. He looked at the dark street. Who's there? I am the chief patrol officer from the inspection office. If you don't reveal yourself, I will shoot, said Li Hao. His forehead was covered in sweat. His arms trembled. At his feet, Black Panther came to a halt. There was nothing there. Li Hao saw from the corner of his eyes that the red shadow was on his left. It was so close to him that it almost touched the side of his face. Li Hao forced himself not to react. He pretended as if he didn't see it. He looked at the main house. No one. Li Hao's voice almost faltered. Cursed Li Hao. Fortunately, none of my colleagues are here. Otherwise, I would be a laughingstock. I almost thought a murderer was hiding in the shadows. He let out a breath and pretended to relax as if he couldn't see the red shadow at all. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked down at Black Panther. He smacked it gently on the head. Silly dog. Why are you barking for no reason? You scared me to death. Black Panther was still scared. It looked at Li Hao as if asking whether he could see it. I see it, thought Li Hao. The red shadow was floating above the dog's head. When Li Hao had reached down to smack the dog on the head, his hand had passed through the red shadow, he felt nothing. Only an invisible coldness that seemed to seep into his arm. He had not felt any obstruction. It almost looks invisible and feels invisible. Li Hao wanted to find out more. He felt bolder. He patted Black Panther's head so he could touch the red shadow again, just to make sure. It felt like nothing. Damn it. I guess that means firearms are useless, thought Li Hao. Li Hao was terrified but he maintained his composure. Whoever was watching him didn't know he could see the red shadow, he needed for them to think that way. Li Hao smacked the dog on the head again. Stupid dog. Bark again and I will leave you here. I was so scared I almost called Professor Yuan to send people from the inspection office and the academy. Chapter 22. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Acting is the real strength. 4. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Li Hao's hand once again went right through the red shadow without any obstruction. Li Hao felt more courageous. The red shadow didn't attack him right away. It seemed to be observing him. He decided to pretend to not see it. Li Hao looked at the dark, cold house and let out a breath. It's getting late. The house is creepy. Maybe I should call Professor Yuan. I don't trust the inspection office. They closed Zhang Yuan's case and filed it as an accident as though nothing was unusual. I can ask Professor Yuan to get the night patrollers if nothing else works, said Li Hao aloud. Li Hao had seen the night patrollers only once from a far distance but he had never had any contact with them, ever. He was only talking aloud to scare whoever was watching. If the red shadow had a consciousness, it would know who he was talking about. Li Hao wanted to test the red shadow and the night patrollers were in league. He actually felt much calmer now. Not only was he alive, but also testing things out. Running away was not a choice. It was a stupid thing to do. If he ran away, the one watching him would know that he could see the red shadow. They might kill him. According to what Li Hao had found out so far, the red shadow will only attack him on a rainy day. There must be a reason behind this. He didn't know what. But he might as well take a gamble for now. Li Hao mumbled. The night patrollers, all in black, do look scary. I wonder if they will answer Professor Yuan. The inspection office seems useless. Those black-robed people are the only ones I can rely on for now. I am not made for investigation, clearly. I was scared half to death just now. I can't really do this on my own, can I, Black Panther? Li Hao pretended to look dejected and took out his communicator. He gritted his teeth. I will ask Professor Yuan for help, he declared. Li Hao dialed Professor Yuan's number on his communicator. Li Hao trembled a little. The red shadow beside him began to flicker suddenly. A faint red thread spread and swooped from outside the courtyard walls and connected with the shadow. Li Hao wondered if someone was calling the red shadow back because the next moment, the red shadow drifted away from him and disappeared. Black Panther wagged its tail. It no longer looked scared. Woof! Woof! It barked softly as if telling Li Hao that everything was fine now. Li Hao's face darkened. It meant that the red shadow and whoever was watching him were in league with each other. He had long suspected that the red shadow did not act on its own, now, he was sure. Whoever was watching him from the courtyard could control the red shadow. They had probably gotten scared when he tried to call his professor to ask him to send the night patrollers and left. Li Hao's method of intimidation had worked. But Li Hao was far from pleased. He was distressed. The red thread that had connected with the red shadow had somehow looked similar to the starlight that had appeared in his stomach when he drank the water. However, Li Hao was not happy at all. The red threads that were spreading over were somewhat similar to the starlight he had seen when he was drinking water, which was the mysterious force. Was the person outside a mysterious super? Wondered Li Hao. If whoever that was could control the red shadow, why didn't they try to kill me? Were they testing me? One thing is clear, the red shadow can't be killed by a gun. But what if the person who controls it is killed? What will happen to the red shadow then? Li Hao felt a little hope. The red shadow was terrifying. But as long as it was a human who was controlling it, it wasn't invincible. Red shadow. Mysterious person, pondered Li Hao. He had also found out something strange. The moment he had touched the red shadow, the jade pendant on his chest had stirred. Li Hao wondered if the starry sky sword could hurt the red shadow. Even if I can't find the saber-shaped, tonight wasn't lost in vain, thought Li Hao excitedly. Maybe he could fight those people. Assuming that they didn't think he was important enough, maybe he could find a moment to strike. Otherwise, the red shadow could kill him in an instant. If I can get rid of whoever controls the red shadow, then it might be possible to fight the shadow itself with the starry sky sword, thought Li Hao, his eyes twinkling. He now had hope. He was no longer afraid. Instead, he wanted revenge. However, I need to find out if this is the only red shadow. Is it the same one I saw on Zhang Yuan? Who is watching me? Probably some big shot. But why? Li Hao worried again. He sighed. He had a little time to himself now. The people who were watching him might not be back for a while. Li Hao wanted to find the saber-shaped stone as soon as possible. At the end of the street. The person under the ghost mask hesitated. Should they leave or stay? If Li Hao really called the night patrollers, it would be troublesome. It will create even greater problems. Forget it. It's unlikely he will get the night patrollers to come here. Even Yuan Shua might not really come, but it's wiser to avoid them for now. The masked person chose to leave. Not very far behind, the red shadow followed silently. The masked person didn't expect Li Hao to find anything at the Zhang residence anyway. They had turned the place upside down and still hadn't found anything. It was probably lost. One thing was for sure. When Li Hao left the academy a year ago, he hadn't seen the red shadow. He just wasn't able to cope with the death of his friend. The masked person ascertained that if Li Hao had seen something, he wouldn't have appeared so calm tonight. The masked person ruled out that possibility, at least. Chapter 23. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Master and Disciple, 1, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation in the Zhang family's old house. In the small courtyard. Even now, Li Hao trembled in fear. His time at the inspection office had turned out to be fruitful, to say the least. If he was still a student of the Silver City Ancient Academy, he wouldn't have been able to compose himself and put on an act while sweating in panic. Hurry up, Black Panther, said Li Hao. We have to find it fast and leave before they get back. Li Hao intended to use Black Panther for now. He was familiar with the Zhang family house, but the dog had a more sensitive nose. Black Panther raised its head and looked at Li Hao. He looked around and lowered his voice. Look around, he said, pointing to his chest. There should be something similar to this. You have a sharp nose, go search for it. Li Hao's best hope was Black Panther. It might actually find what he was looking for. The dog had been very excited and eager when it saw the jade pendant. Li Hao wondered if that was why the dog had hung around in the first place. Had it sensed his jade pendant even before Li Hao got familiar with it? Perhaps Black Panther could smell the stone too. Zhang's family had lived in this house for a very long time. If the saber-shaped stone was to be found, it would be here. The Black Panther was excited. He eagerly wagged its tail and ran around. It could only smell the stone from a close distance. If it didn't know better, it could miss it. Black Panther's nose twitched. Its legs crouched. Its nose touched the ground and sniffed. Li Hao thought that if he found the stone, he might get more benefits out of it. While Black Panther sniffed and searched, Li Hao didn't stay idle. He began to explore the courtyard. The corners, the ground, the tree. The people who controlled the Red Shadow might have already searched these places and found nothing. But Li Hao knew what the stone looked like. They didn't. They might not even know that the Zhang family's saber was actually a stone. If Li Hao told anyone that the jade pendant he wore around his neck was actually the starry sky sword of the Li family, no one would believe him. The way the song mentions the weapons in the Li and Zhang family, anybody would assume they are real swords which might have been passed down from generations. The imagination definitely painted them as fierce and domineering weapons. Who could even guess that the Li family's sword was a small jade pendant and the Zhang family's saber was just an unremarkable piece of stone? 20 minutes had passed. Li Hao was getting anxious. What if he couldn't find it? Had they already taken the stone? Or was it lost? Even Black Panther was still sniffing around. If it was here, the dog should have been able to smell it by now. Li Hao couldn't stay here forever. He had scared away his watchers for now, but that didn't mean they wouldn't be back. He couldn't keep searching here. He would be discovered sooner or later. He stood in the middle of the courtyard and looked at the master bedroom and the second bedroom. If I were Zhang Yuan's father, where would I keep the stone? Li Hao asked himself. That day, I am not sure if Uncle Zhang picked the stone up after he threw it to the ground. But even after that, I never saw it again when I came to this house. If it was still around, I would have seen it. It didn't mean much to Uncle Zhang, that was for sure, Li Hao ascertained. Otherwise, he wouldn't have thrown it around with that kind of attitude. Being calm, he tried to recall the incident and the days after. After Zhang Yuan was beaten up by his father, he had refused to come out and play with me for 3 days. Did Uncle Zhang take the stone somewhere else? What would he do with a mere stone, wondered Li Hao. All I know is, the stone disappeared during that period. Otherwise, I would have seen it again. Li Hao sighed in frustration. He had been too young. He couldn't remember properly. What had happened in those 3 days? If the stone was really lost, there would be no way to find it. Even Black Panther can't smell it. Is it too far away, or is its sense of smell being interfered with, wondered Li Hao. His eyes widened. There were 2 places where there were too many smells of things. The kitchen and the latrine pit. Old houses like these were built with a latrine pit in the old days instead of a toilet. Li Hao remembered that the latrine pit and the kitchen were in the process of being repaired on that day. There was a possibility. Uncle Zhang, did you fix the kitchen first or the latrine pit, wondered Li Hao. Li Hao determined that if the stone was in this house, it was most probably in one of those 2 places. Chapter 24. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Master and Disciple, 2, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Li Hao walked to the kitchen first. He did not want to venture into the latrine unless he couldn't find the stone in the kitchen. If the stone was in the latrine, Li Hao didn't think he wanted to find it anyhow. He didn't want to soak it in the water, and he couldn't even give that to Black Panther to drink, much less himself. He had the jade starry sky sword anyway. Black Panther, follow me, called Li Hao as he walked to the kitchen. Black Panther ran after him enthusiastically. The kitchen hadn't been used in so many years. When he pushed the door open, he saw a dusty large pot on the stove. The iron pot had long rusted and the wooden lid was rotten. Black Panther, see if you can find it there. Please don't mind the smell, said Li Hao, pointing to the large pot on the stove. The kitchen hadn't been touched in many years. There was a faint smell of dust commingled with the smell of oil and smoke. Black Panther was a little dizzy with all these smells. It had sniffed this place before but hadn't found anything. Black Panther jumped at Li Hao's words and approached the pot. It sniffed it. The tip of its nose was covered with dust and soot. Li Hao walked around and looked into containers. He paid close attention to things that had been repaired around a decade ago. Only in those things could he expect for the stone to be hidden. The people who controlled the Red Shadow might now have paid attention to the rusted things in the kitchen. Would the saber be hidden here somewhere? Li Hao obviously wasn't careless. He knew that those people who were after the stone took this seriously as well. He saw signs of the kitchen having been searched, even the ashes under the stove had been stirred. If the ashes were undisturbed, it wouldn't look like this. They were looking for it too. They didn't even spare the furnace. They are really very dedicated, thought Li Hao. Black Panther found nothing. Li Hao was disappointed. Is it really in the latrine? Disgusting. As he was lamenting at the prospect, Li Hao's eyes rested on the chimney over the stove. The kitchen of old houses was all equipped with brick chimneys. Without a chimney, it would be hard to cook with all the smoke. Li Hao suddenly had an idea. Was Uncle Zhang repairing the chimney when he hit Zhang Yuan that day? He vaguely remembered it. Li Hao looked at Black Panther. The dog was not very big, it was still a pup. Could it climb a chimney? Black Panther was still sniffing the pot. Li Hao carried it and placed it at the mouth of the chimney. Try and see if you find anything here. Black Panther looked at him helplessly. But it sniffed the area. Its nose twitched. A familiar smell filled its nose. Woof! Woof! Barked Black Panther happily. Li Hao was ecstatic. It's really here. Those people probably had searched around the chimney and hadn't found anything. But their Red Shadow couldn't really go through bricks. They might have expected some kind of a box, or a small compartment to hide the stone. Who would have thought the Zhang family hid their ancestral heirloom in a brick chimney? The gray walls were already flaking off. There were bricks on the inside. Li Hao scraped at it and more of the outer layer came off. There was a small space inside, a very insignificant space. But it was there. Li Hao's eyes lit up. This is it, he thought. Li Hao vaguely remembered the stone. It was no bigger than a fist. He scraped more of the wall and found the stone inside. Uncle Zhang did respect his ancestors. Li Hao didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. He had disliked it when Zhang Yuan's father had hit his son for this. But now, he was thankful to the old man for hiding this here. Of the 8 families, Li Hao didn't have any idea what their families did with their heirlooms. Li family's sword had been easier to pass down because it was only a small pendant that can be worn around the neck. But it must not have been easy to come up with a way to explain this piece of stone while passing it down to other generations. Perhaps it had looked different before, thought Li Hao. Maybe it turned to stone when it was passed down to Uncle Zhang. Li Hao had no energy to think about that for now. He looked at the stone in his hand happily. It hadn't been easy to find it. Li Hao looked at the chimney. He wished there was a way to return it to the way it was before. The place where he had scraped the wall was very obvious. Having worked at the inspection office, he had learned a thing or two. He knew that those people would be back to see why Li Hao had come here in the first place. Chapter 25. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Master and Disciple, 3, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. With a part missing from the chimney, those people might guess everything. If Li Hao had only been a student, he would have taken the stone and left the place as soon as possible. And if the people with the Red Shadow came back, they would be able to find out about the Zhang family's saber. Li Hao would have been in big trouble. What should I do, thought Li Hao. He couldn't leave it like this. He couldn't put the stone saber back either. Even if he placed it back and made it look like nothing had happened, they would find out anyway. The people with the Red Shadow were smart. They had been monitoring this place for a year. There was no way they couldn't see something different about it. Li Hao frowned. He could replace it with another stone. But still, it would raise doubts. Should I destroy the chimney completely, he thought. But that would be too much. I can find a similar stone, then destroy the chimney. Even if they rebuilt it, nothing will be missing. In his training, Li Hao had of course learnt the basic skill of making sure whether the evidence was genuine or not and how to destroy evidence. He had also learnt to recreate evidence. Li Hao thought more about it. This house had been abandoned for many years. No one was around. He didn't have to rush. He let out a breath. It was good that he had found what he came here for. But Li Hao realized that he needed to trouble his professor again. Li Hao walked out of the kitchen and dialed Professor Yuan's number. His professor accepted the call very fast. "Are you all right?" asked Professor Yuan. "Hello, Professor." "I am fine," said Li Hao, thankful for his concern. "Professor, I didn't find anything significant in Zhang Yuan's house, but it seems that some people have been watching the place. His house had been ransacked. Somebody has been inside. Do you think it was the murderer?" "What are you thinking?" said Professor Yuan. "If the murderer was here, what were they looking for?" "Did they find it?" said Li Hao. "My words don't have much weight. Could I trouble you to send people over from the inspection office? If they make a big commotion about it and maybe try to demolish a part of the house, the person responsible might be alerted by it and could be lured out." Demolish the house. Was there a need for that, wondered Professor Yuan. Zhang Yuan's house might be already old and it was not a crime scene, so demolishing it wasn't that big of a deal. Professor Yuan wondered if Li Hao had actually discovered something. Did he really intend to lure out the murderer? Li Hao was sure that the demolition of the house would attract the enemy's attention. It didn't matter. The more noise, the better. Even better if there was actually a mole at the inspection office. He only needed to do one thing now. Replace the saber stone with a similar-looking stone. Even if the enemy restored everything later, they won't be suspicious. The people with the red shadow might guess that Li Hao had found some clues, but they won't know for sure whether he had found the stone. That was what Li Hao wanted. He wanted to make them suspicious but still doubtful. That uncertainty would work in his favor and give him more time to blow up the case so that the night patrollers had no choice but to get involved. The people with the red shadow themselves have been laying low because they don't want the information to be public. I can do something opposite to that, thought Li Hao. It would attract attention to myself, but I want to cause the commotion to avenge my friend. Besides, the attention might help me finally get in contact with the night patrollers. Li Hao finally made his decision. He might be able to get in contact with the night patrollers, after all. He could offer the footprints outside the house as evidence to his superiors. It would cause a lot of commotion. But that was what he needed for now. Professor Yuan asked a few questions to confirm if this was what he wanted. He trusted his student. He knew Li Hao was smart and he wouldn't do something like this for no reason. Since Li Hao seemed to know what he was doing, Professor Yuan decided to support him. Chapter 26. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Master and Disciple, 4, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, alright. I will call the inspection office immediately and send them over. If Zhang Yuan was murdered, the academy won't ignore the matter either. Leave the place for now. In an hour at most, people from the inspection office and the Silver City Ancient Academy will be there. Thank you so much, Professor, said Li Hao gratefully. His teacher looked formidable but was very kind when his students needed him. That was why Li Hao was so reluctant to get him involved. He was unwilling to tell him about the Red Shadow. Professor Yuan might seem scary and authoritative, but at the end of the day, he was an ordinary person like any other. Li Hao didn't want to put his professor in danger. You're welcome, said Professor Yuan. After a few more talks, he cut off the communication. Silver City Ancient Academy. Yuan Shua was over 70 years old, but he was still full of energy and very strong physically. He looked more like a soldier than a scholar. There was a file on the desk in front of Professor Yuan Shua. A file about 6 self-immolation cases. The inspection office is indeed full of holes. He placed the communicator down. He rubbed his temples and cursed. It was so easy to get the files leaked. Many in the Silver City could get their hands on it if they were trying hard enough. The inspection office had become more and more careless over the years. That student of mine is really troublesome. He even went on to investigate the cases by himself. And he dares to report directly to the inspection office at that. Even at a glance, all this seems very unusual. Professor Yuan sighed. You are really NA.VE, Li Hao, thought Professor Yuan. Don't you know the inspection office is full of holes? Anyone could see after having a look at the cases that they were connected. Something was terribly wrong. The Li family's sword, the Zhang family's saber, the Zhao family's fist, the Lu family's leg, hummed Yuan Shua. He wondered if this was related to Li Hao. 6 people are dead, he muttered. I don't know if the song is related to the deaths, but, as a citizen of Silver City and much older in age, Yuan Shua knew the song. He was a scholar. When he saw the names of the dead people in the case file, he was immediately reminded of the Silver City song. The surnames were all similar. Yuan Shua dialed a number in his communicator. I am Yuan Shua, he said in a steady but commanding voice. My student is in danger. The self-immolation case that happened a year ago might have been a homicide. Can you get more information on that? I don't care about that. Li Hao is my student. He became my student the moment he joined the academy. Do you know why? Because he is a genius. A top-tier explorer. He is the future of the Department of Ancient Civilization for all I know. Because of your negligence, he had no choice but to withdraw from the academy. Do you know how much damage that has caused? Li Hao has made some excellent discoveries, but your inspection office is full of holes. He is in danger. He is at the Zhang house as we speak. I don't care what you do, but you have to save him from there. I don't care if you have to level the streets, even. You have to get rid of ghosts and monsters, if that is what it's going to take. Cut the CR*P. Send your people over immediately. I don't care how big of a commotion it makes. Surround that street and push forward. Lure out the murderer who might be hiding there. I have only one request. Nothing should happen to Li Hao. That's it, then. If you can't deal with that, then I will go directly to the night patrollers. 6 self-immolation cases. 6. Do you think I am blind? Anybody can see the connection. If my student dies because you are unwilling to take action, I will make a lot more fuss than this and skin your office, do you get me? Professor Yuan, please calm down. I'll deal with it immediately. Please don't worry, said the captain of the law enforcement team from the other end. The captain had a headache. Professor Yuan didn't have direct control over the inspection division as a whole, but he knew many powerful people. He had served at the Silver City Ancient Academy for almost 50 years, some of his students held many powerful titles around the Silver City. If things got out of hand, it would truly be worrisome. Don't tell me not to worry. The academy will send someone there too. If nothing works, I am going to go personally. I would like to see who would dare to kill a student of the academy. Yuan Shua was enraged. Li Hao needed him to blow things up and he would do it gladly. As for him, no one would dare to eliminate him. Far too many people knew him and needed him for now. As for Li Hao, he would make sure they didn't dare touch him at all. Yuan Shua's anger disappeared the moment he cut off the communication. He looked out of his room and sighed softly. Kid, you need to be careful. As for Zhang Yuan's matter, you have done enough, thought Yuan Shuo. What a pity, he mumbled regretfully. It was a pity that he couldn't draw in the mysterious energy himself. If he could get involved more and solve this matter before it got out of control. If I could draw the mysterious energy, with my attainments of skills from the Book of Five Beasts, I would be 3 times stronger. All the ghosts, shadows and monsters would be insignificant, thought Yuan Shuo. Humph, grunted Yuan Shuo in indignation. If only the night patrollers could let me enter the mystical realm. He wouldn't have worked with them otherwise. All these years, he tried to think of a way but he was at a loss. He sighed. Li Hao, the Li family sword, stuck in his mind. Yuan Shuo closed his eyes. Li Hao should just return to the academy and be my assistant, thought Yuan Shuo. He felt he was too old now and he needed to prepare a successor to take over his responsibilities. Chapter 27. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Silver City Law Enforcement Team, 1, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation 10 o'clock at night. The sound of cars vrooming filled the air. The quiet old street hadn't been so lively for such a long time. Lights shone and people came out of the cars. Old Street seemed to have come to life for a moment like in the past. Li Hao watched the scene from in front of the Zhang family residence. He didn't want to be the center of attention. However, he changed his mind when he found out that he could interact with the Red Shadow. He was suddenly in the spotlight now. Li Hao knew he was important but because of that, he had intended to keep a low profile. But now, he wanted to let everyone know that he was investigating the case only because of Zhang Yuan and nothing else. Li Hao wanted to establish that he had no personal stake in this. He was not trying to discover anything. He wanted everyone to assume that he was impulsive and impetuous and he made a mess because he was loyal to his friend. No other reason. Perhaps people wanted to see him like that. Li Hao believed that would work in his favor. He wanted to establish himself as reckless and imprudent while lacking critical intelligence to understand things. That was what Li Hao wanted to be seen as. It would lower his enemy's guard and make them think that he was stupid. But that wouldn't work either. If Li Hao was that stupid, he wouldn't have been able to catch the attention and favor of Professor Yuan Shuo that easily. That would seem too fake. With each step, Li Hao thought about what he could and couldn't do. He had taken only a small stone and made such a big commotion. He needed this commotion to hide the fact that he had taken the stone in the first place. If this story got out, no one would even believe it. That was what Li Hao was after. The more outrageous a story seems, the less people will pay attention to it. Boom. 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 Leather boots thudded on the ground. A team of fully armed patrol officers surrounded the old street. More patrol officers arrived and entered the Zhang family residence. The inspector general hadn't come, thankfully. But Li Hao recognized the brawny man at the front of the group. He was the captain of the law enforcement team. He was even rumored to be second in command to the inspector general. In level, he was considered the same as the chief of inspection office, Wang Jie. However, his duties were entirely different, as was his authority. The captain of the law enforcement team, Lu Long, wasn't to be trifled with. He did not wear a black inspector uniform today but was in casual clothes with a trench coat over the shirt. It was not suitable for the current weather. Li Hao figured he was carrying a lot of weapons under that trench coat. He had heard about the captain of the law enforcement team. He was tough and regal. He was also dangerous. This captain had killed many people. "Who is Li Hao?" shouted Lu Long as he walked forward. His leather shoes crushed the stones on the ground. As he saw Li Hao from afar, his eyes flashed. Amazing. He was an expert. The inspection division as a whole might not have any supers, but there were some combat experts who could easily take on 10 people at once. One such expert looked at Li Hao now. Level 3 Patrol Office. Li Hao reporting, sir. Li Hao walked over and stood straight. I was here to investigate a case under orders. Greetings, Captain Liu. It is an honor to make your acquaintance. Humph, Captain Liu grunted. His gaze was sharp when he looked at Li Hao. There was a hint of anger in those eyes. Li Hao, as a member of the inspection division, you are a disgrace. Li Hao flinched. He frowned. Captain Liu's voice was cold and unyielding. It was like the roar of a wrathful tiger. He didn't even care if anyone heard him. The inspection office comes under the inspection division. It is the most crucial organization in the whole of Silver City. As a member of such an organization, why are you undertaking an investigation without proper authorization? You should have directly reported to your office in the face of anything suspicious. Lu Long's voice was intimidating. He took a step forward towards Li Hao. There had still been some distance between the two, but that one step had covered that distance, and now the captain stood in front of Li Hao in the blink of an eye. Li Hao's heart froze. A true expert. He had seen Lu Long before, but he had never seen him this close. If Li Hao pulled out a gun in front of someone like this, he would already be dead. But, did he make use of the mysterious power as well, wondered Li Hao. Or was it possible for someone to be this powerful with training? Li Hao was nervous. He lowered his head. I wouldn't dare, sir, he said in a trembling voice. I was in danger, and the only person I could think of was my teacher at that moment. I did not dare to ask the inspection office for help because I had no concrete evidence to trouble them with something like this. Lu Long snorted. If you didn't have evidence, then look for one now. Tell me, what happened here? He seemed to have acknowledged Li Hao's answer for now. Li Hao hesitated. I have already reported on the self-immolation cases. I assume Captain Liu is well informed about that. Captain Liu nodded. I know about them. I am Zhang Yuan's best friend. I was very close to him, so I felt it to be my duty to confirm about his death. I came here to see if I could find any clues about his condition, because I am sure that his death was not an accident but a murder. Li Hao calmed himself and continued, I was looking around the house when I realized that someone was following me. I am very familiar with my friend's house as I have spent a major part of my childhood here. I noticed that somebody had been in the house because things weren't where they were supposed to be. I became even more suspicious when I found footprints right outside the courtyard wall of the house. There aren't many people here, said Li Hao. Most of the people who used to live here have moved away. The Zhang family residence is in the deepest part of the old street where nobody ventures. So, technically, no one should have been in the vicinity of this old house. Chapter 28. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Silver City Law Enforcement Team, 2, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, take me there. Lu Long's words were irrefutable. He turned to the group behind him. Seal off the entire street and search each and every house, every corner. Ask around and find out if anyone has seen a stranger in this area. Don't let anyone leave or enter. If anyone resists, tell them they would be doing so at the risk of being shot. Yes, sir. The group dispersed to follow the orders. They were fast and efficient. Li Hao couldn't care less about their noisy bustle. He led Lu Long towards the outside walls of the Zhang family residence. Li Hao didn't need to say anything. Lu Long carefully observed the shallow footprint. He squatted down to have a closer look. Lu Long's eyes were sharp and cold. There were a few law enforcement team elites beside him. They waited for the captain's orders. Wu Chao, come and take a look. The man strode forward. He had white gloves on. He squatted down and checked the footprint. All Li Hao saw were a few blurry prints in the ground. But the man who went by the name of Wu Chao could gather so much information from just a few footprints. The suspect is a male. The height is about 180 centimeters, the weight is unknown, and the footprints are shallow. The deepest footprints should have been left about 2 hours ago, and the shallowest ones should have been left more than half a year ago. He is not weak. He seems to be no lower than a class 2. It is possible he might be a lot stronger than that. Li Hao thought that was strange, but he knew better than to interrupt. Lu Long was considerate of the fact that Li Hao, as a level 3 patrol officer, might not know what it meant. So, he explained, the law enforcement team ranks the dangerous elements by class. Not just weapons or skill, but any dangerous element or entity. We group them in 3 classes. Class 1 is the strongest, Class 3 the weakest, continued Captain Liu. To be able to kill a member of the confidential information room, a Class 3 is enough. We have a total of 20.8 people in the confidential information room, informed Li Hao. There are several old patrol officers. Li Hao was embarrassed. Lu Long sneered. The head of your inspection office, Chief Wang Jia, isn't as weak as he seems. He had some skills, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to lead your office at all. But after being transferred to the confidential information room in your inspection office, he has been out of practice. I bet even the lowest ranker from the law enforcement team could tackle him easily now. Not all bandits are as dangerous as to be classified in this manner, continued Lu Long, only the very dangerous ones are classified into the 3 categories. 3 years ago, there was a massacre in Silver City. The bastard who killed 32 people of the Hu family with his bare hands in one night was a Class 3 bandit. In all these years, there have been very few bandits in Silver City who have been ranked in classes. A Class 3 bandit, although considered the weakest, was actually so terrifying going by the law enforcement team standard. Li Hao's expression turned grave as he thought about the Class 2 or even possibly Class 1 bandit that Wu Chao had mentioned. Li Hao was surprisingly not shocked. That person used a mysterious power to control the Red Shadow, after all. Li Hao was only surprised that a Class 3 bandit could be so powerful. If that was so, the mysterious person that he had witnessed might be even stronger beyond his imagination. What stunned him the most was how they were able to gather so much information from a few footprints alone. That was amazing. Wu Chao, a middle-aged man, turned to look at Li Hao. Officer Li, do you not believe me? No. I mean, there is no doubt about your abilities, of course. I am just very surprised, said Li Hao hurriedly. Wu Chao smiled. Are all students of Silver City Ancient Academy this humble, he said. They all seem so stuck up and pretentious. But you are strange. I heard you dropped out of the academy to join the inspection office. Wu Chao jumped in the air and landed on the ground, leaving a pair of footprints. He smiled. People with different skills and weight will have different reactions when they land on the ground. The depth of the footprints they leave will be different every time, even the front and back parts of an entire footprint can be restored. Depending on where the person landed first, their posture can also be determined. From the way a person lands, I can deduce information about pretty much everything regarding them. The footprints you showed us are of different depths. He must have landed from a few meters high, but the footprints aren't very deep. This means that whoever it was could easily control their muscles. As Wu Chao explained, Li Hao listened. The explanation wasn't really needed. But Li Hao, even if he had dropped out, was still a student willing to learn. Lu Lan had been listening silently and didn't interrupt. After Wu Chao was done explaining, he said, "All right. He is not part of our team, so there is no need for him to know so much." Li Hao just smiled gratefully at them but didn't say anything. Lu Long looked at the old house of the Zhang family. They are quite bold. They kill someone and monitor the victim's house for days, months even. Wu Chao smiled. Captain, isn't it usual for the enemy to be this bold? The law enforcement team might not be able to do anything to them. Chapter 29. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Silver City Law Enforcement Team, 3, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Lu Long's eyes flashed. That's not true. Some people always think they are superior to others, and in the process, they underestimate their enemy. But over the years, hasn't our law enforcement team killed those high and mighty criminals? As he said that, others laughed a little. Li Hao, on the other hand, was curious. What does that mean? Are they talking about mysterious people with magical powers, he wondered. Li Hao was engrossed in his thoughts when Lu Long turned to him. Officer Li, sometimes you need to believe in the strength of the law enforcement team. I know you had your own reasons to reach out to your professor. However, I can see that you are not as stupid as you pretend to be. You were able to dig out the self-immolation cases and connect it to your friend's death. That shows patience and grit. Our inspection office needs someone as meticulous as you. You did not directly turn to the law enforcement team, so you might have a lot of concerns regarding the organization. I understand. Lu Long's voice was indifferent. However, you must remember that even a strong dragon cannot suppress a simple snake in its territory sometimes. You might think that the 6 cases are not something ordinary people can solve. But my team has people who can even surpass the Class 1 bandits sometimes. Lu Long's voice rang. He appeared domineering. In the Silver City, even the dragon has to coil up to rest sometimes. That's where we come in. It's not like things cannot be done without the night patrollers. It's not like I haven't beaten some of the night patrollers myself. The captain scowled in displeasure. Li Hao was stunned. Was it true, he wondered. The captain had mentioned the night patrollers without any hesitation. He had seen right through Li Hao. Li Hao had wanted to involve the night patrollers because this case involved a mysterious power, but the captain had seen through his intentions. Li Hao quickly tried to think of an excuse. I don't understand, Captain, liar, said Lu Long, coldly. What's there to not understand? You dig out the 6 cases out of countless cases. You understand everything. Do not lie to me that you don't know about the existence of the night patrollers. No matter how powerful they might seem to you, there is still someone above them. Li Hao, said the captain, a little more gently. The inspection division and the night patrollers are managed by the same organization. We are all colleagues. The first taboo that the night patrollers broke was when they attacked their own people. Why are you so afraid of them? They can just as likely be scolded for doing something wrong as the rest of us. Li Hao was shocked. Everyone else was a little wary. The night patrollers, supposedly respected, feared and even revered, were not even worthy of such devotion in the eyes of the captain. An old female patrol officer behind Li Hao chuckled. Officer Li, the captain is just bragging now. But he is right. They aren't as high and mighty and fearful as you expect. Those guys are simply unlucky. Every time they appear, people assume something big has happened. They come with an ominous omen. How dare you, thundered Lu Long. One of his team members had accused him of bragging. The female patrol officer laughed. She seemed neither to care nor fear the captain. She turned to Li Hao again. The reason why the captain is working himself up and why we are interested in you is because we feel that you are wasting your talent at the confidential information room. Li Hao, would you consider joining us in the law enforcement team? Li Hao was speechless. He could not respond. His mind had truly turned blank. Lu Long looked at him, his face cold, but his tone calmer. I see that you are a little clever, patient and loyal. You seem acceptable. I can offer you a position as a level 2 patrol officer. You will mainly do some case analysis, filing. The female patrol officer interrupted the captain with a gentle smile. To put it simply, the law enforcement team needs talents like you. You have proven yourself to be meticulous and you found a connection between the 6 cases out of thousands of cases you might have gone through. We of course have many strong and boorish people in the law enforcement teams, but they sometimes lack essential analyzing skills. Sometimes, they find some clues but not enough to continue the case. For example, your friend Zhang Yuan's case. At the time, the law enforcement team didn't find significant clues and obviously didn't connect them to the other 6 cases. The case appeared simple enough and was dropped. Otherwise, if we had seen this pattern, we would have started a serious investigation into it, she explained. They are actually recruiting me, thought Li Hao, still too stunned to speak. The law enforcement team actually needed him. They were even offering to up his rank to level 2. Lu Long was so cold to him, he had thought the captain was really displeased, but it seemed that was not the case. Lu Long looked at him indifferently. If you join us, you might be able to solve the self-immolation cases much faster. We don't have many people who are good at analyzing things, so we transfer the cases to the Blaster Night Patrollers most of the time. But with you in our team, we could find more clues. If you request your professor to put you in contact with the Night Patrollers, who knows how many favors you will owe him. His words hit Li Hao with clarity. Captain Lu was right. He was intending to ask Professor Yuan to put him in contact with the Night Patrollers, but that would mean he would owe him big time. Chapter 30. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Silver City Law Enforcement Team, 4, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Lu Long looked at him coldly. Take your time and think about it, he said. This is not a small matter, after all. The law enforcement team doesn't lack elites. The most important thing is to catch this culprit before he wreaks any more havoc. He could be an expert or even a super for that matter. Lu Long strode away and headed to the Zhang family residence. Li Hao followed. He put aside the offer for now and thought of how he could get the captain to demolish the house. This was his best friend's home. Li Hao searched the house. Lu Long ordered. If we can't find any useful clues, we will raise this place to the ground anyway. We will dig 3 feet under to see if we find anything. If we don't, we will set fire to the whole damn place. I would like to see what they have been searching for by keeping an eye on this place for so long. Li Hao gasped inwardly. The captain looked fierce and domineering, it seemed he was also very reckless. That worked fine with Li Hao. That was what he wanted anyway. I don't care if I have to burn it. If you really want whatever you are looking for, then show yourself, should Captain Lu into the air. The captain's way of handling this case was in line with Li Hao's taste. As a member of the inspection division, working in one of their inspection offices, Li Hao was well aware of the law enforcement team. However, he had always thought the organization a little useless compared to the night patrollers. But now he doubted himself. How could a team led by such a person as Captain Lu be useless? But the fact remained that the law enforcement team was like a sieve, full of holes. Otherwise, how could the case reported by Li Hao have been leaked? Maybe there was indeed a mole in the team. Li Hao was lost in his thoughts when the female patrol officer, who had interrupted the captain so fearlessly, approached and smiled at him. Officer Li, please don't mind the captain. He is always like that. In fact, he appears cold and indifferent towards you because he really thinks you can be an asset to our team. Despite how he appears, he is really hoping you will join us. Li Hao was perplexed. Was it really necessary for them to recruit him? He felt like he had done nothing so remarkable as to be offered a place in the law enforcement team. He had only reported a case. The female patrol officer chuckled, noticing his surprise. The captain has said before. We don't lack in terms of combat skills, weapons, or authority. But we do need smart and meticulous people who can spot things when something is wrong, she sighed. Also, you have no personal connection with the law enforcement team as a whole. The captain feels that there are traitors among us. He tried to find the moles but couldn't. He is disappointed with himself because of that. He can't be seen investigating the internal workings of the whole team. So, he is turning to you. I hope you can use your wisdom to find the vermin in the law enforcement team too. Li Hao's shock never seemed to end today. So, Lu Long already knew that there was a mole. Not only did he know about it, but he also wanted to investigate it. Lu Long was recruiting him to be his weapon. Li Hao hesitated. The female patrol officer smiled reassuringly towards him. Please do consider it. You can work with us to solve your friend's case. And even if we fail, you will have the opportunity to participate in the investigation anyway with the night patrollers. Those in the confidential information room aren't allowed to undertake investigation by themselves. It is admirable that you dropped out of the academy to find out what happened to your friend. But being in the confidential information room will only take you so far. A year is enough, don't you think? Or, are you planning to remain there forever poring over old case files yet not being able to get involved in solving them? Li Hao's mind wandered again. He realized he was so distracted tonight. He had always disliked the law enforcement team because he had thought them incompetent at handling cases properly. None of the people here were ordinary. They were extraordinarily smart, otherwise they wouldn't have been recruited to work for the most infamous law enforcement agency. The female patrol officer's words rang in his mind. He hesitated. Will they find out that he had taken the saber-shaped stone of the Zhang family from the chimney? He had been so scared of being discovered by the enemy that he had not considered that he might be outed by the law enforcement team itself. Li Hao had been glad when Lu Long had arrived with his team. He had no problem with the house being burned down. That was what he wanted. But would they notice that he had taken the stone? Could they really be fooled by the replacement stone he had placed inside? I will just blame the person who controls the red shadow, thought Li Hao apprehensively. I will just say I don't know anything. He had been careless. One shouldn't overestimate oneself. He had not considered the fact that the law enforcement team would catch his act. He had underestimated Captain Lu's team. Li Hao continued to follow Captain Lu while being lost in thought. The cold and overbearing captain, the charmingly persuasive female patrol officer, and Wu Chao who could see countless clues at a glance. The law enforcement team indeed had some hidden talents that shouldn't be underestimated. If the law enforcement team that he had always thought incompetent were this meticulous, how would the night patrollers be? Li Hao had dreamed once of joining the night patrollers. Li Hao had wanted to solve the case with them to know why the 6 self-immolation cases occurred. Even if he died, he would at least have an answer. But these people were so smart. Li Hao felt that he couldn't hide anything from them. They would find out anyway. Or, they might already know. Li Hao suddenly felt a chill down his spine when he considered that possibility. The outside world can be scary. The confidential information room is like a secret safe hideout. It is certainly comfortable. Lu Long looked at Li Hao. Li Hao felt as though the captain was testing him. Was he testing me when he declared to burn down the house too, wondered Li Hao. The captain hadn't asked him about anything yet. He hadn't asked Li Hao if he had found or seen anything. Li Hao was afraid. He wondered if he had smiled or appeared relieved when the captain had declared to burn the house down. No, I didn't react. Li Hao thought he deserved praise for keeping his cool.